In the Wake of War, The Ballard Chronicles, Book 1, by Stephen L. Nowland. Prologue. Captain Ellis hated the sea. The turgid waters swelled and crashed against the shoreline, pounding away at rocks jutting up from the frozen sands with a monotony matched only by the unyielding gray skies. Were he to give it half a chance, the sea would take the captain's life in a heartbeat without pity or remorse. The sea had no friends. From where he stood, Ellis's gray eyes watched his ship, the Evermore, at anchor, as near to the coast as she could be without being drawn in and dashed apart on the unforgiving rocks. The bitter wind caressed her bare rigging as she patiently waited for her crew's task to be done. Only 5 men had stayed behind to keep her safe, with the rest accompanying their captain and his passenger to the dangerous shore. Given a choice, Ellis would have stayed in calmer waters further to the south, but times were tough, and he had taken this job to stay afloat, as it were. He couldn't fight the allure of easy money. Still, 2 weeks on this god's-forsaken rock was testing his patience, and he yearned to be gone. Behind him, over a dozen men sifted and dug through great piles of twisted and blackened metal lying on the rocky sands, searching for the proverbial needle in a haystack. Captain Ellis narrowed his cold gaze on his passenger, moving amongst the ship's crew in the ongoing search for whatever had brought them here. Dressed in a dark cloak of fine weave, little could be seen of the man's features, and his name remained a mystery. Ellis always preferred to look his business partners in the eye, yet once more the promise of great riches had been dangled before him, all for the promise of anonymity. Ellis caught the eye of his first mate, Devon, a sharp-featured, wiry little man dressed in a dirty old long coat. In spite of his shabby appearance, he had a mind like a steel trap, and used it on more than one occasion to secure work for the ship. Sensing his captain's silent inquiry, Devon threaded his way through the crew and casually sauntered over. "What's the good word, Dev?" Ellis asked without shifting his gaze from the ongoing work. "Nothing but sand and great bloody chunks of metal, Captain," the sailor grunted. "The crew are getting restless. Doesn't matter how good the pay is. It's frustrating trying to find something when we're not even told exactly what it is we're looking for." "If you're fishing for information, I'm in the dark as much as you are," the captain offered with a shrug. "It's all part of the deal. If our customer wants us to shift piles of metal on a beach for days on end, that's what we're going to do." "Don't have to tell me twice, Captain," Devon assured him. "But some of the lads are pretty superstitious about this place. They don't call it the Isle of the Dead because of its population of fluffy kittens. They're cold and scared, and the longer we stay here, the worse it's going to get. Anything on this island, living or dead, was destroyed when the falling star hit a couple of years ago, mate," Ellis impatiently reminded him. "Try telling them that," Devon chuckled, drawing only a grunt of acknowledgement from the captain. They'd had this discussion many times over the past few weeks, but Ellis was out of options. "I've plied my trade on the seas for going on 20 years, mate, and I've never seen work so hard to come by. Everyone's broke, or maybe they're just hoarding their money, waiting on better times to come around." The captain lowered his voice as he continued speaking. "If we didn't take this job, I was probably going to have to sell the old girl," he confided, glancing back to the Evermore. "It's that bad?" "Just remind the crew of the money coming our way," Ellis growled. "After this, we'll sail to the south and soak up the warmth for a few months." "Yeah, about that," Devon muttered, reaching into his long coat and withdrawing a sheaf of rolled papers. "I caught a glimpse of our passenger's face a little while ago when he thought nobody was looking." Ellis glanced at the dark-cloaked man who continued to search the wreckage. There was an air of desperation in his movements, as if he too were growing tired of the tedious expedition. "I've no interest in learning anything about the man, Dev," Ellis stated flatly. "He paid extra for anonymity, and I won't jeopardize that." "Respectfully, Captain, he's not going to know if you know who he is," the first mate pointed out as he leafed through the papers in his hand. "Besides, if my guess is right, you might change your mind." Devon liked to make some extra money on the side, keeping an eye out for wanted criminals, who often tried to flee justice aboard ships, like the Evermore. Finding the one he was looking for, Devon pulled out a paper from the pile and handed it to the captain. "Wanted for high crimes, Osric d'Avignon," he mumbled aloud. "Dead or alive, reward of 1,000 gold sovereigns? Wait, I've heard of this one. He used to be king of Tulsone, but got kicked off his throne by his brother." "That's the one," Devon confirmed. "The Queen says he did some nasty stuff above and beyond being our enemy during the war, if you can believe that." "You reckon this is the man scrounging through a pile of junk on this freezing cold beach?" "I do." 1,000 sovereigns, Ellis muttered to himself, staring at the unusually well-drawn face sketched on the paper in his trembling hands. The entire crew and their families would be set for life, and then some. He stared at the back of his passenger, wondering what lay hidden beneath the obscuring hood, and made a decision. Is he armed? I've seen the hilt of a weapon sticking out of his belt, but there was no blade on it. Might be a memento or something? Not much good for anything except maybe a knuckle duster. Pass the word. When I give the signal, I want 5 men to hold him. Don't take any chances. Knock him out if you need to. With pleasure, Captain, Devon said, touching one hand to his forehead in salute. He quietly moved amongst the crew, whispering quick instructions to the most trusted men, while Ellis headed for their esteemed guest. The man who may well be a former king had cleared a space around a particular piece of wreckage and crouched amongst blackened pieces of twisted metal. He carefully pushed aside other, smaller pieces of debris and focused upon something in the sand. Ellis stood a few yards behind him and observed this for a few moments before making his presence known. "Have you found something, Osric?" he asked casually, as if they were friends. "At long last I found the whole reason we came here," he replied, until his voice trailed off when he realized he'd been tricked into revealing his identity. Ellis narrowed his eyes in triumph. This would be a very lucrative catch. Devon caught his eye from a few yards away, and giving the captain a quick nod to confirm they were ready. "It's a real shame, you losing your throne like that," Ellis went on, slowly moving in along with half a dozen of his crew. "Seems to me a competent king would have seen it coming." "My reputation precedes me, it seems," Osric remarked, without any hint of fear. His hands continued moving in the sand, though Ellis couldn't see what he was doing. "I don't suppose I might prevail upon your honor to carry out our agreement?" "The agreement has changed, I'm sorry to say. I'm not normally one to renege on a business deal, but I've had a chance to snag 10 times what you're offering, from the Queen of Nowland, no less." "Everyone has their price," Osric answered bitterly. "What happens now?" "We're done here," Ellis said, as much to the crew as to his prisoner. "We're heading back to the ship where we will show you accommodation more appropriate to a criminal of your station. Sometimes men in your position can get desperate and lash out without realizing it. My advice to you is to keep calm or my lads will have to knock you out. The wanted notice says dead or alive, and alive doesn't make a mess. So, Mr. d'Avignon, come along quietly and we won't have to kill you." Osric slowly stood up and turned to face the captain, raising his chin and pulling back his dark hood for the first time since they'd met. He was nobility, all right, with fine features, blonde hair, and dark eyes. A scraggly beard had formed during their time on the beach, yet his proud nature was still on display. This was not a man accustomed to surrender. In his hand was the empty hilt of his weapon, into which he placed a small blue gem. "You will address me as Your Majesty," Osric sneered, just as the Evermore's crew leapt on top of him. A heartbeat later, Osric burst out of the hold as those same 6 men were thrown back several yards to land heavily in the sand or on top of debris. A clear sword, its edge glowing with blue light, flashed in his hand where the empty hilt had been, and with no warning, Osric dashed forward and slashed the weapon across Ellis's leg. He fell to the ground in astonishment and pain, grasping at the searing wound as he watched Osric move amongst the crew faster than he thought possible, cutting down anyone who sought to challenge him. Devon was the first to fall, taking the strange sword in his gut for his trouble. Despite his grave injury, Ellis tried to regain his footing, grasping the hilt of his cutlass in an attempt to rally his crew. Nobody, not even his strongest men, could stand against the fallen king, who seemed to revel in the fighting. When it became obvious they simply couldn't beat him, Evermore's few remaining crew backed away from the monster, hands raised to signify their surrender. Osric raised his left arm and pointed his fist at them, and with a quick gesture, a blast of energy shot forward, engulfing them in green fire. Osric ignored their cries and turned to point his arm towards the Evermore, sending another bolt of green lightning towards the ship. Aghast at the carnage, Ellis could only watch as a storm of green fire engulfed the masts and quickly spread through the vulnerable timber, dooming the ship to a fiery end. Osric let out a cry of delight at the display and glanced down at the wounded captain, who futilely tried to stem the loss of blood with one hand as his life was destroyed around him. "I can't abide deal-breakers," the fallen king explained with a half-smile on his lips. "But in thanks for reuniting me with true power, I give you your life. Enjoy the final days of your existence on this bleak, frozen rock, and think of your mistake." He touched a small metal box attached to his wrist and vanished in a flash of violet light, leaving the captain of the Evermore to his fate.